Here, let's just play the end of this clip because it is actually Marco Rubio, who I never like to agree with, but it is pretty funny what his response was.
That the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
Well, he was.
Okay, so, I mean, look, do you know how perfect you got to throw a lob in order to get Marco Rubio to dunk on you like that? You know how fucking Gary Payton perfect, John Stockton just perfect lob you got to throw in order to set him up. It was almost, you could almost like see the little glimmer in Marco Rubio's eyes where it's like at the end of White Men Can't Jump where he's like, oh, I could dunk that one. That's pretty easy. I don't see how I could. Am I being baited into a trap here? Like, it's like, I'm going to take issue with your claim that in excess of free speech is what led to the genocide of the Jews in the Second World War. That's not how I remember it. That's not how I was taught. You know, like, it's just, I don't know. But like, there is, look, I mean, like, Rob, you kind of gave away the answer at the beginning, as I'm sure, you know, most people listening know. But right there, it's just the game is that the establishment's rule relies on censoring speech. And that's really as simple as it is. And so they actually do. It's you know, every accusation is a confession type thing. They're confessing here that actually, yeah, they do see this as a threat to the world, to the global world order, that the vice president would be going over and advocating for free speech in Europe. Let that sink in for a little bit. They actually see that as like an alarming, controversial view. You should go over and argue in Europe that they ought to allow their citizens to dissent from the government, which is, by the way, all that free speech is ever about, really, when you think about it. You know, it's all just about, like, are you allowed to dissent from the people with the guns? Like, are you allowed, you know, there's this group of people that are at the center of society that call themselves the government. And essentially what a government is a group of people who have a monopoly on the aggressive use of violence, right? This is like, of all the different ways that people think of governments. And if I were to go into, say, like a high school or a college class or something like that, and I were to ask somebody for a definition of the government, say, what is the government? You know, there'd be a lot of different answers that people would give me. None of them would be an accurate description. The only accurate description of a government is a group of people who maintain a monopoly on the initiation of violence or threats thereof. That really describes the government, if you think about it, okay? Because you could say, like, oh, the government are the ones who write the laws or something like that. But I could go, I don't know. I write the laws for my house. Am I the government of my house? And it's like, no, not really. Even though you can make the rules. You can make the rules you could make the rules whatever you want to in your house if you own it. I could make the rules that you have to wear green pants and hop on one leg when you come in my house. But why am I not a government? And the reason is because all I can really do to enforce that is kick you out of my house. All I can do is take I can't like initiate violence against you. Otherwise, the government will come in and arrest me because I'm a criminal now. You're not allowed to do that. There's only one group of people who are allowed to do that, and that's the government. They have the military, they have the cops, they have more guns than everybody else. And so they decide what they're allowed to do and what you're allowed to do. Now, they can tax you and call it taxation. If anybody else were to do that, you'd be guilty of extortion or robbery or whatever. They can start a war. Nobody else can do that. They can throw you in prison. Nobody else can do that. They have a monopoly in the truest sense of the term. They are the only ones who are allowed to initiate violence without consequences. at least theoretically. Like you could get away with killing somebody, but you're at least risking that you would go to jail for it, whereas the government isn't even risking that. And so this whole free speech conversation, really what it's about is about whether you're free to dissent from the government or not. Other than that, like even in the height of, say, like tech censorship, right? Which, what would you say, 2020 was probably the worst year of tech censorship. There were people arguing for like flat earthers and stuff on there. There were people doing you know what I'm saying? Like you could have conspiracy theories. You could be wrong about stuff. You could always criticize people who it's popular to criticize, but you couldn't really criticize the lockdowns or the COVID vax. Like you can't criticize them. And so this is what it always comes down to. It's the question is, should Europeans be allowed to criticize their governments? And J.D. Vance is taking the radical and dangerous position that they ought to be allowed to. That's really what it all comes down to.
It's really incredible what the media will try and sell you on. And I'm loving the storyline of them outraged over what's going on with Doge, and them trying to say they're not actually finding fraud and abuse. And it's such an odd approach from the media because we're spending too much money as a country. And if there's actually massive amounts of just fraudulent payments that Elon Musk is able to clean up and maybe get us out of this mess without having to even cut back on too many entitlement programs, that would be such a massive win. If you could cut the budget deficit by 20%, because it turns out it's just going to faulty Social Security numbers and just sporadic bank accounts abroad, wouldn't that be a great turnaround story that someone managed to clean that up? And it's amazing how the entire media apparatus is screaming about how even though he's got the power of the president, and the president won in part because he was going to do this, and it's no different than when governments create agencies and nothing's happening without the authority of the president, they couldn't be more outraged over the fact that fraud and abuse is being discovered, and they're trying to spin every story as no, it's not actually being uncovered, or it's minor, or that's impossible. The government has other agencies that would spot this if it was there. It's such an amazing thing that they want to sell you on. No, they can't possibly be covering on fraud and abuse.
Well, it's also like you know, like so many of the responses to the Doge stuff are that, right, one of them will be, there's a couple that I've seen, they're all just cartoonishly stupid. But one of them is that like, no, this isn't the appropriate way to do this, and that we already have things in position for that.
Yeah, well, they're not working.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That's like,
right?
That's like the newest thing out of Europe is Europe needs to be at the table for the negotiations in order for us to have a long-lasting peace or a solidified peace. Or I forget the bullshit word that they're using, but they're admitting like, oh yeah, Donald Trump could probably get this done. But their new bullshit, the same as that Putin was going to take over all of Europe, is that it won't be a lasting peace unless Europe's at the table. And it's like, what exactly is Europe bringing to the table in this discussion that will make it a lasting peace?
It's also
that Donald Trump,
bullshit.
yeah, of course it's bullshit.
Such bullshit. It's also like, look, I mean, this is kind of harsh to say. And just to be clear, because obviously I've talked about this for years and years now, but Ukraine really is a victim in all of this. And like that's certainly like that's something that should be appreciated. Like, and basically all the people in our camp who have been arguing against this war from the very beginning have all been saying that the whole time. It was John Mearsheimer's quote in, I think he said it in either 2014 or 2015. But it was where he said the U.S. is leading Ukraine down the primrose path, which evidently I did not know at the time when I heard it. I remember hearing the speech and being like, "Oh, that's a real beautiful way to say that." And like I like it kind of made sense even. But anyway, it comes from Shakespeare, and the idea is like that you're leading someone down a beautiful path that ultimately leads to their demise. So like we're saying all this nice stuff to them. Oh, you're going to be in NATO. We're going to do joint NATO military training with the Ukrainian military. We're going to give you weapons. We're going to give you aid. You stand up to Russia and don't worry, you're going to be a part of the Western world. But really what we were encouraging them to do was pick a fight with Russia that we were not truly going to have their back in. And so, you know what I mean? It's like, in a lot of ways. And then of course, it does at least seem, I mean, look, I'm not pretending I can get inside Zelensky's head, but it does at least seem like Zelensky was interested in that initial peace agreement after Vladimir Putin had invaded, and that it was Boris Johnson, as an agent of the West, who basically forced his hand out of it and made him have to. And so Ukraine kind of is a victim in all of this. But at the same time, the reality is that Ukraine doesn't really have a seat at the table here. I know people don't like to hear that. They like to go, well, why doesn't Ukraine get to decide about Ukraine's future? It's like, because the world doesn't work that way. And what's going on in Ukraine is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. What's going on in Ukraine is a proxy war between the United States of America and Russia.
And the last administration at that.
Yes, and not even the current administration. So sorry, to negotiate here actually really just requires the US and Russia. Look, the whole Burisma scandal that Joe Biden found himself in, because Burisma was, if you guys remember, the Ukrainian natural gas company that was put Hunter Biden on the board, was paying him like $150,000 a month to be on a board of a Ukrainian energy company. He has no experience in the energy sector and doesn't speak Ukrainian, but they needed his valuable insight on this board. So, okay, so obviously what happened was they were very in bed with the Yanukovych government. Barack Obama, when Joe Biden was vice president and kind of in charge of Ukraine policy, the Obama government backed the coup against Yanukovych and overthrew him. Okay, so then this government, this company Burisma, is freaked out because they were in bed with a government who was just overthrown. Okay, and so they wanted to ingratiate themselves to the new government. And so what did they do? Instead of bribing one of the officials in the Poroshenko government, they just went right to the source. Oh, we'll pay off the vice president of the United States of America's kid. So essentially my point is that was even a recognition then of who was really in charge. Like, forget the Poroshenko government. Go bribe off a Biden. That's what'll really get you security. Okay, so like they knew what they needed to do to really get security. And no, the truth is that the Ukrainians don't really need to be involved in these negotiations. This is
it's also if the U.S. is pulling support, good luck, Zelensky. What does Zelensky do then? If Donald Trump goes, hey, well, I put together the peace agreement, you're giving up these territories, the war's over, you're not getting into NATO, and here's a security guarantee, which will be a nonsense, whatever guarantee that the Russians won't continue to take territory. But what's Zelensky going to do? I don't take the offer. And then Donald Trump goes, all right, Putin, you can have it. We'll stop you if you get to Poland.
Well, it's kind of like, it'd be like if, let's just say, like, you're out with a girl, Rob, and she said you're out at a bar with a girl and she goes, this guy is like, this guy's like being a creep. He said something creepy to me. And then she goes to him, she goes, well, this guy Rob I'm with is going to kick your ass or something. And then you start talking to him and you guys are talking shit. And then it's like, hey, guys, we don't want to have a bar fight here. So Rob, why don't you and this guy just talk this out? Okay. And then I were to say, well, really the chick should get involved in these conversations too, because it's not a true peace unless all three of you agree. It's like, no, sorry, no. Because these are the two ones here who are actually capable of fighting. Look, there are three great powers in the world right now, okay? The three great powers are the United States of America, China, and Russia, and in that order, okay? That is, two of the great powers in the world are fighting a proxy war here. That's the story. Between the two of us, we have, I think, 90% of the world's not nuclear stockpile. Okay, that's the conversation here, is to find peace between America and Russia. Zelensky ultimately, as always, is going to have to do what he's told. And like you said, all it takes is, okay, if the U.S. just goes, we're pulling every ounce of support out that we have, then he has to do whatever Putin tells him to do. So like it doesn't matter. And Europe and NATO, all of them, that's just the European wing of the American empire, period. There's no, this is on the level of, like, I don't know what, if it was like the Soviet Union and you were like, okay, well, we got to deal with Moscow. We got to negotiate with Moscow. And you were like, no, I really think what you want to do is talk to Estonia. Like, what? It's like, no, that's just a satellite of the Soviet Union. That is not, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not a different player here. And so anyway, the whole thing is it's all just so ridiculous. I do want to play, though, by the way, because this has also been going super viral, and I do think it's just worth playing. Let's play the clip from 60 Minutes, where there's a conversation with between CBS and 3 German prosecutors. I will say, to walk back my earlier comments about not caring that much about the internal politics of European countries, I will admit that this is chilling, if you ask me. So let's play that clip.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish. But if you in the internet, if I insult you or a politician,
that sticks around forever.
Yeah.
The prosecutors explained German law also prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, and fake quotes.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
The punishment for breaking hate speech laws can include jail time for repeat offenders.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Okay. So this is I mean, what can you say about that? That's really creepy.
The guy in the middle.
I mean, I guess this is the type of stuff that prevents a Holocaust, Rob.
Well, not when the government's in control of what it gets to say is true or not true information.
Right.
And if you learned anything from COVID, it's they're not that good at that. But the guy in the middle, I mean, he looks like Eric Idle. And the first time I was watching this, I didn't think you had sent me a real news clip where he's like, no, it's even more dangerous when it's online. What are you talking about? How is that? Because it stays. And she's like, oh, the logic, this brilliance of this man, it can stay online forever, or it could just evaporate with the 1,000 other tweets that get sent off every 2 seconds. I mean, you're looking at, I didn't realize that Germany was this totalitarian, but obviously free states can't have that you're not allowed to say offensive things in person or on the internet, because who gets to determine what is true and what's offensive? And if you said something politely or not politely, you're just ceding over power to the government to, get people in trouble it doesn't like.
Oh, I mean, it's with all of these things, and it's the same thing, whether you say, as they say their thing, insults, or
frankly, I find Jews offensive, just their very existence. They got ratty faces, so anything they say, it's just a ploy from them to try and use their Jew tricks to take my money. So if anything, this is, we might have to restore free speech just for the Jews to continue to be able to exist in Germany.
Well, look, I mean, that's probably going to affect our YouTube numbers in Germany. But sorry, I apologize to our German listeners. But it is, I mean, obviously, right? I mean, it's so weird because it's such a basic argument that you can't even imagine that anybody's still having it today. But this is what I argued with David Cross about back in when we were on that panel together in like 2018 or whatever that was, where it's like, no, you're going to sit here and say, oh, we need censorship, but we're only going to ban lies. It's like, all right. I mean, that sounds nice, except who gets to be the one who determines what is the truth and what is a lie? And, you could think about so many contentious political issues where that's what the whole debate is about. And it becomes this thing where you're just presuming the conclusion to say that your side is the truth and the other side is a lie. But it's the same with insults, right? Like, even you're going to say, oh, we're just saying people aren't allowed to insult each other. But then who gets to determine what's an insult and what's not? I mean, I'm sure, we've all had this experience where somebody has told you, just in life, forget even like political disagreements, but we've always had this experience just in a disagreement, in an argument, where someone's like offended by what you said. And you're like, yeah, well, I'm offended by what you said. So where does that get us? Right? We're right back to square one. I've had it happens to me constantly. Listen, as somebody, and I've been known to throw out a few myself too, but as somebody who gets insulted constantly on social media, I'm going to say those people should face jail time for insulting me? Like, what? Like, somehow you have some conception of rights where I have the right to not be insulted, but you don't have the right to speak your mind? Like, think about how backward that is, how sick that is. And like, again, who after living...
How does German insulted court work? How does that work? You show up, I was insulted. Run by queers with complaints by queers?
I don't know. Yes, I would honestly think that, and I mean this very genuinely, Rob, I think we would both find what those three prosecutors just said both offensive and insulting.
He declined my invitation to a party. I'm insulted. Now what, you gotta go in jail because you were antisocial?
I mean, it really is, it's something. And of course, by the way, he let it slip that if you insult someone or a politician, ooh, I wonder why that's what came to your mind. I wonder why. What a coincidence that's the first thing you thought of was a politician. Oh yeah, because that's all this is always about, is whether or not you can dissent from your government. The thing about it is, right, is that it's, in a way, they're in a pickle. I mean, the people at Saturday Night Live and Hollywood and obviously the people in the corporate media, but like the late night hosts and Saturday Night Live and people in Hollywood, they went all in on this kind of like demonization of Donald Trump and of Trump supporters. And the problem, of course, was that this blinded them to everything else, and particularly blinded them to why people supported Donald Trump, because they didn't just see Donald Trump. They saw the other actors in the room too. But when you hate Donald Trump with such a singular focus, you blind yourself to all this other stuff. And then, of course, that's what led them to support Joe Biden. And that's what led them to pretend Joe Biden wasn't senile for all these years. But after 4 years of Joe Biden, they wake up in this new world where, like, for the first time, we watched on CNN as they explained those numbers to us. Remember, they kept underlining them so that we could see the difference between the numbers. But like, really, aside from a few days in his first term, but for the first time, Donald Trump is popular. Donald Trump has a net positive approval rating. And so most Americans, or at least most voting Americans, support Donald Trump. So it's just, what they're struggling with is like, well, while you're trying to caricature the Trump supporter in reality is most of us. That's just the new political reality that we're in. And so now, if their game is going to be demonizing most Americans, you don't need to be the woke outrage police. The market's going to take care of this on its own. And of course it has been. It has been. It's like all of these people have been losing viewers for years now. And so, in a way, to me, I saw a little bit, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw a little bit of the event, and it was kind of sad to me because I grew up such a huge Saturday Night Live fan.
And it's all lame. Everything I tried to check out just wasn't hitting, and they're rehashing old bits, and it's just not fresh and funny. And, it was interesting for me because I've never watched SNL. I've never watched it. It's never been a show that I watched. And the wealth of talent that came off of that show and then went on to do the funniest things in the entire world. And then I go back and watch this, and listen, it doesn't appeal to me, whatever. But then it's funny because everyone's celebrating the thing, and you're like, all right, let's go check it out. It's the best comedians in the entire world. These are the most talented people in the world. And miss after miss of lameness, where you're like, all right, why am I even trying to get into this? I don't watch the show when it's the show.
Yeah, it's to me, it's just kind of like, look, the last 10 years really have the mainstream, which is no longer the mainstream, has just been so broken that it's like not capable of producing greatness anymore. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's just the kind of where we are. Like, it's just, these guys are just not, they're so just not tuned in to the new moment. I mean, talk about, by the way, is an example of this, right? Is when I know we played it on the clip and we ruthlessly mocked him, but he deserves it. But when Chris Cuomo said that now that the podcast space has become the place, you're going to see all the A-list talent going there, and it won't be me and Joe Rogan anymore, because it'll be Louis C.K. and Stephen A. Smith are going to come in and take over the podcasting world. And it's just like, man, talk about not having your finger on the pulse.
Also, like
just talk.
By the way,
and Louis C.K. is one of the greatest comedians ever. I am not at all arguing his talent, but the idea that he's going to go replace Rogan as like the podcast guy, like, you just don't know. I don't know.
Also, there's a great thing about radio, which is it is its own medium. And Louis C.K. is one of my all-time favorite comics. He actually did this 3-hour stint. Firstly, all of his appearances on Opie and Anthony are incredible.
He was great on that show.
One of the best one is with Donald Rumsfeld, when he keeps asking Donald Rumsfeld if he's a lizard. And then also you can find this if you want to do a deep dive. He once on the O&A channel like hosted this 3-hour thing on a Saturday night, and he's just kind of uncomfortable doing it and talking about how he shouldn't be there. And there's this weird meta moment where someone calls him in to try and coach him with how he should handle the show. And the listener's so stupid that he doesn't realize he called into something while it's live. And Louis just like agreeing with the guy of like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I should probably incorporate if that I'm going to do. Like, it makes no sense. Anyways, with all that said, Louis is a super talent. They try and launch people into the podcast space all the time, and they're not radio people. That's what this is. And they stink at it. So like, you're just objectively wrong. You can bring the biggest Fox News anchors and hand them podcasts, and you're going to find out, oh, they're not that interesting or good. They were platformed by Fox News. And you can bring, by the way, I think Bill Murray's one of the funniest people ever. He's a movie star. I don't think he'd be a great podcaster.
Yeah, that's right.
It might be interesting. I like the first episode, Bill Murray's sitting down for drinks with someone. That might be interesting. I don't know that he really knows how to conduct an interview, or that he's not good when he's kind of just responding and doing the sarcastic Bill Murray aloof thing. I don't think he hosts a show. That's not what he does. So it's just dead wrong when people look at it, you know, and it's like throwing a boxer into MMA. He might be a great boxer. That doesn't mean he can do MMA.
No, that's exactly right. And then just to take it a step further, like when you're talking about in this kind of, you know, space of political commentary or whatever, it's like, oh no, there's a huge current thing going on that Joe Rogan taps into. And to think that you could just take anybody and put them in that role, of that they'll tap into that too. Again, it's the old school mentality of like, oh, well, if the CNN 8 p.m. hour leaves, you plug someone else in there and then they get that audience. But it's like, that's not how this new game works, dude. It's just a different thing. And that was one of the things to me that was just very apparent watching the Saturday Night Live thing, just for the little bit that I did, that it's like, oh, you guys just you're not tapped into what's going on now. You just don't get, and it's a shame in a way, because there would be a lot of really funny shit you could do with it. But you're not able to, because you don't even get it. You don't even really understand. Like in the same way that like during the cultural revolution of the 60s, there was just no way that like your grandma was going to produce great comedy about it. She didn't really get it. She doesn't even really know what, in her mind, what she's thinking of that is a weird caricature of what's actually going on. Whereas like somebody in, you know, like George Carlin might be able to make it really hilarious because he got it. He was of it, you know, and like that's the thing, is that these guys, particularly in the podcast scene, they are of this new world. Like they know it because they are it. And these other guys are dinosaurs. They just don't understand what they're even commenting on. It's like listening to what was Elon's guy's troll name or whatever.
Big balls, like, giant balls, little balls, tiny nuts.
It's listening to CNN talk about big balls, and it's like, oh, you don't even understand the kind of troll culture. Like you just don't even get what it is. You couldn't possibly analyze it. There's just so many steps behind.
The fact that a brilliant wizard kid who once at 12 years old had a name Harry Balls. Like, well, then where are you going to find a good autist to work at your company if everyone who had a funny Twitter handles out off the books? You're going to have to hire from India.